morning, Richard.
Morning, Sherman. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing pretty good. I'm here in somewhat sunny Okanagan, Vernon, British Columbia. We do have some smoke rolling through the valley, which is a bit of a surprise given that we're approaching late October, and as you know, some wonderful weather in Vancouver. I'm here with Richard Williams, who's the Chief Executive Officer of Cornish Metals. It's been a while, Richard, since we had a chance to update each other.
Yeah, we've had a busy summer. Lots going on down at South Crofty. So yeah, happy to be here. It's good.
Yeah, we really wanted to do a couple things today. Is get an update on what is going on in South Crofty. I mean, Cornish Metals is a significant player, a significant. I guess you can't really even call it a discovery because it's got a known deposit and a known asset, although there's tons of discovery potential. But yeah, I thought we'd do a couple things today. Is a bit of an update on Cornish Metals, and I know you've been primarily in the UK, working hard. I mean, obviously, and we talked about this yesterday. It was wonderful timing to get the financing closed, so that really strategically puts Cornish Metals in a wonderful place where it's well funded with a tremendous asset. But maybe we'll start just talking about Cornish Metals, and then I'd really want to get into sort of the overall fundamentals of copper and tin as an exciting topic for our listeners, because we're entering a very interesting phase right now where you've got incredibly low prices for some of the junior stocks like Cornish Metals and other companies. So it really a very interesting time for investors to be able to pick and choose which companies they want to own. And to highlight, I guess, the incredible opportunity when it comes to investing in tin companies and copper companies with what's going on globally. So I guess the last part of our conversation, I'd like to chat about your views on the tin price and the copper price, and more, I guess, is how incredibly important these things are going to be for developing a global economy. Like, how can we possibly we were going to need a lot more copper and a lot more tin. So I guess that would be the end part of it. So I'll hand it over to you tell us what's going on in South Crofty.
Yeah, sure. Look, just to remind your viewers here, we closed the financing at the end of May this year, raised 65 million Canadian dollars, or 40.5 million pounds. And the lead investor on that was a new resource fund called Vision Blue Resources, headed up by Sir Nick Davis, who formerly was the CEO of Xstrata. And they've put a fund together where they are trying to fund projects that are really critical to this energy transition that seems to be going on right around the world, where a move away from fossil fuel type power generation into more renewable energy, solar farms, wind turbines, etc. And they recognize the importance of tin to that whole energy transition and the electrification and transition to more of a technology-based economy. So we closed that at the end of May, and we've got two key activities going on currently down at the project in parallel. One is construction of a water treatment plant, and that will be used to treat water as we pump the water that's currently occupying the South Crofty underground mine. And at the same time, we have 3 drill rigs operating, 2 drilling from surface, 1 drilling underground. And they are collecting samples from the east, central and western part of the current mineral resource area to collect representative samples for metallurgical studies. So that includes new ore sorting technology, paste backfill studies, and just general mineral processing studies. So that's all ongoing. The drill program's about 10,000 meters of drilling total. We drill in what are called parent holes and then wedges off them to collect all the sample that we need for all of this metallurgical test work. We've had a period of really ramping up activities at site. Up until May this year, we were really in almost a care and maintenance mode at South Crofty. And the idea being once we had the funding, we could push forwards into building the team and getting the water treatment plant built. So we've hired a new project manager, project engineer, feasibility study manager. Currently, we have about 50 people on payroll, so we've really increased the team significantly through the summer. We're in the process of putting in the pad for the water treatment plant. We've got the pumps, pipes, variable speed drives on site. We expect to be commissioning the water treatment plant and start dewatering the mine by the end of the first half of next year. So lots going on. That's all that's going on down at the project at the moment.
Awesome. Yeah. So some great developments. And I guess, the second part is to talk, about the tin price. But I guess before we do that, I mean, for investors, maybe just talk about the history of South Crofty and how incredibly important. I mean, one of the themes that we've been working with is number one, we're going to need a lot of tin. We're going to need a lot of copper. Where do you get these things? And, is to build some awareness for investors on how significant, South Crofty is and how historic it is in terms of the mining industry.
Yeah, look, Cornwall itself is a great tin province. Other tin provinces around the world would include kind of that China, Myanmar, Indonesia, Malaysia belt. There's a significant tin mine in Tasmania called Renison Bell. But Cornwall itself has got a long history of tin mining. In fact, there's obviously the Bronze Age. To make bronze, you need tin and copper, and both occur in Cornwall. So there's lots of evidence of activity down in Cornwall dating back to the Bronze Age. So tin has been known about and mined, exploited in Cornwall for a long time. South Crofty itself, earliest recorded production was in 1592, which is pretty hard to wrap your head around, 400 odd years ago. But it started off principally as a copper mine, a very high grade copper from vein systems, not too dissimilar from, say, a vein hosted gold system. And as those operations got deeper and they passed through the copper zone and they followed the veins down into the underlying granite, and in the granite it became tin rich. And about 100 years ago, 1905, there was a shaft sunk through the middle of the old copper workings down into the underlying tin mineralization, and that was the start of the South Crofty tin mine. And that operated continually up until 1998, when the mine closed. From a tin price perspective, the tin price crashed in 1985. Most of the hard rock tin mines around the world closed down because of that lower tin price. South Crofty kept going for 13 years until it closed in 98, which is a reflection of, I think, the high grade mineralization that's there. And then the big change in the tin world was about 20 years ago when the EU passed legislation outlawing the use of lead solder, and the only suitable replacement was tin. And so now tin is basically essential to all things electronic. Anything with an electrical connection has tin in it. And what that change in law led to was a significant increase in demand for tin. So it went from around 250,000 tons of tin per year for the more traditional uses like tin plating, glass, PVC, to the more modern application of solder. And now 50% of all the tin consumption annually goes into solder. And what really that led to over the last 20 years was a significant drawdown in all of the warehoused tin stocks around the world, because all of a sudden it's being used for consumer electronics, computers, laptops, iPhones. Without tin, we wouldn't have the technology and the society we have today. And you could say that for a number of metals, but tin is important to this whole kind of technology supercycle, as the International Tin Association wants to refer to it. So what we've seen over the last year is a real drawdown in stocks of tin. and a corresponding increase in price, and it did peak at about $50,000 a ton earlier this year.
Yeah, in March, right?
Yeah, and now we've backed off considerably down to about $20,000 a ton, and I think that's all in relation to events, geopolitical events, Russia, Ukraine, inflation, reduction in demand, but it doesn't change the macro fundamentals for the tin world in that there's not enough production to meet the growing demand that everybody is forecasting, especially when you look at the energy transition and the need for renewable power, solar panel fields, etc. So interesting times, but that's kind of the background of what happened at South Crofty and where the tin price is today.
Well, that makes complete sense, and that's why it really lines up with what we're telling investors is, it's sort of as Robert Friedland I think recently said, it's the revenge of the old economy, where you've got the world economies are absolutely going to need things like tin, copper. I mean, it's almost like it's almost a must for humanity in a way when you look at these zero emission targets that are real. I mean, I don't think, as you know, I was in Kathmandu, and I think it was actually in March in Nepal, and it's absolutely stunning how much pollution there is from the combustion vehicle. And so part of what we're seeing, I mean, well, the large part of electrification is to help us live better. And in order to do that, we're going to need tin, we're going to need copper. And so the thesis is really simple. I mean, you've got this world demand that's just going to continue to increase for assets like tin. And then you got a company like Cornish Metals, which is, trading at a very low valuation relative to the assets that it has in the ground. So, I think that's the big takeaway for investors is how do you position yourself to take it, to grow with this tin market and this copper market. And you've also got some copper assets as well.
Yeah, look, I think coming back to exposure to tin, it's a very interesting world currently. There's really only 3 companies, maybe 4, that are publicly listed, that give investors some exposure to it in the tin world. There's a company called Alphamin, which is listed in Toronto. They've got the Bissy tin mine in Congo, very high grade. It's the highest grade tin deposit in the world. That's in production. Then there's Metals X, listed in Australia. They operate the Renison Bell mine in Tasmania. Then there's ourselves, and we're the only dual listed company. We're listed in Canada and on the TSX, and also in London on the AIM exchange. There are some other projects which potentially have economic tin resources, but they're further away because they need to go through the permitting process. So that from a tin perspective, there's really not a lot to get exposure to. When you look at current tin consumption, it's around about 370,000 tons of tin per year, and about 20 to 25% of that demand is met through recycling. So tin is one of the most recycled metals. And then when you look at the balance of that, 75% of the mined tin comes from China, Myanmar, and Indonesia. And the huge shift in the geopolitical risk that we are seeing today has really opened up Western governments' eyes to the importance of domestic supply where possible. And I was just reading an article this morning from SP Angel in the UK that was highlighting the latest investments or grant funding from the US government into battery technology companies in the US. There's about $2.5 billion worth of grant funding to get projects up and running, to get processing facilities built in the US to meet this growing demand. Because historically and typically the resource sector is very cyclic in nature. And when you're in a market like we are today, it makes it very difficult for companies to raise capital to advance projects. And what we're going to see here is this lag of inability to raise funding. So when the prices do go up, those projects still have years to go till they can get into production. And so I think that the US government is kind of recognizing some of those aspects and the limitations of the market that we see today. But you have to have some government catalyst to get these projects going to meet the growing demand and to alleviate the risk that some of these governments recognize that they're at from securing supply. So very interesting times.
Yeah, that's very interesting, Richard, because I know that I was at a conference, I can't remember which one now, whether it was Beaver Creek or where I was, but it's almost, what you're suggesting, which I think is accurate, is that it's becoming a national security issue for some governments.
Yeah, no, very much so. Another example, and this comes from the Vision Blue Group, that's our biggest shareholder. They've made an investment into a company that mines silica in British Columbia, and they're going to be looking to process that silica down in the US, where the US is going to provide competitive rate power to build a smelter. And this all comes back to the risk surrounding production, manufacturing, and delivery of semiconductors, microchips, which we've all experienced over the last couple of years through COVID and the supply chain disruptions. I was at another presentation just before PDAC this year, and the chap presenting was just talking about exactly that, semiconductor growth projections over the next 5-10 years. And it's almost parabolic because the way society is changing and the way people are demanding that everything is stored electronically. The data storage requirements are enormous. The computer processing requirements are massive. And to make these microchips, you need silica and you need tin. And so, I think that was clearly recognized by the US government earlier this summer, where they passed another funding round. That one was much bigger. It's about $250 billion for domestic growth in the technology sector. And I think 50 billion of that was earmarked to build a domestic semiconductor manufacturing industry within the US. It's pretty hard to believe that there isn't one. But a lot of these governments have been offshoring production of these technologies for a long time. And this chap, he mentioned one statistic that really stuck with me. It was something like 90% of all the semiconductors in the world are designed in the US, but about 85% of them are manufactured and packaged in Southeast Asia. So, you're really at risk if there's any disruption to the supply chain, which we've seen certainly in the car industry, where delivery of vehicles has really been slowed down because car manufacturers couldn't get hold of microchips. That's a problem. And so there's a real change in recognition. So, Canada this year, the US government already had one, and the UK government published their own critical minerals lists. And tin is on those lists because in Europe, there's only byproduct tin, a very small amount from some of the tungsten mines in Portugal and Spain. And there's zero tin production in North America. So it very much is a strategic metal, very important to keeping these technology changes progressing in society. And so, that's the opportunity for Cornish Metals, is to participate in that. Like just Europe alone consumes about 70,000 tons of tin per year. So it's completely reliant on supplies from outside of the EU, I would argue.
Well, that's an overall great update and lots of good information. So, thanks a lot, Richard, for taking the time. And I've been with Richard Williams, the Chief Executive Officer of Cornish Metals, and I think we've sort of we've painted a great story. I mean, it just makes a ton of sense, and which is why you've attracted, the kind of capital that you have. And we really wanted to just do this update and highlight to investors the the remarkable value and the upside of Cornish metals.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks, Sean.
All right, we'll talk to you soon. Thanks, Richard.
Okay, bye.